All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Going Live with Good Soil, episode number 87. Matt and I do this on our YouTube channel for Good Soil Investment, as well as on Twitter Spaces at the same time. And Matt and I were just commenting right before this recording started that the Twitter Spaces seems to be upping their game, and they had a few new options for like pre-game music and stuff. It was pretty interesting, and Matt was speculating if Elon and Tesla will ever do their earnings call on Twitter Spaces. I think they will. I mean, at some point, right? I mean, why wouldn't they, right, Matt? I mean, didn't Elon kind of allude to that at some point? Like there was going to be something on Twitter Spaces soon.
I don't know if Elon said anything about that. I don't recall hearing that, but yeah, I mean they've been so innovative. I mean, a couple of years ago, bringing Galley up and doing the say.com. It seems like they're always looking for kind of innovative ways to up the game because like the way most companies do earnings calls is just so boring and kind of outdated. So I think there's plenty of room for innovation there.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think like Elon's referred to it a couple times that for Twitter to seriously be improved, they really have to like rewrite the entire code, basically rewrite the entire Twitter platform in a much more simplistic way, because just the legacy, codes and systems built on top of legacy codes and systems with all kinds of patch marks and band-aids. It's just like huge. I can imagine it's like a huge Rube Goldberg machine of a coding system that like you mess with one little thing, it messes up the whole machine. You got to figure out how to reverse engineer back to fixing it again or something. So maybe they can't do too much innovative stuff on Twitter Spaces until they rebuild the entire Twitter platform, I guess. I don't know. That's something for Elon to talk about, I guess, at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably lower down on their priorities list. So, I've seen several people in the comments say my video is terrible, so I might try switching my internet over. So I may drop out for a bit, but I can keep hearing you on Twitter Spaces.
Okay. Yeah, your video is pretty blurry. Maybe it's just my video is so good, and yours is. I got my internet fixed yesterday. Matt and I were having our kind of prep call, and my internet was broken, and I was nervous I'd get it fixed or not in time. But it's fixed and stellar right now. So let's see if Matt's getting his internet fixed right now. Can you still hear me, Matt?
Yep, I can still hear you
Okay,
because
good.
it's going through Spaces.
Okay, all right. Some people are saying get Starlink, Matt. I thought Matt might have gotten Starlink, or no, you didn't get Starlink yet, did you? It's not available in your area.
They've got like a bad version of it where you always have the worst. Like they said, I could sign up for it, but I would get like the lowest priority, essentially something like that for speed.
Wow, that might be
Which
better than the current internet though you have though.
it might be. You know what's so frustrating is I had a guy from AT&T out here not too long ago, and he like found the problem. Apparently, he fixed it, and it seems like it's gotten worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. I'm lucky I have a couple guys I trust that know this stuff that come over and help out from time to time. I think Matt disappeared from the YouTube live stream temporarily. His internet has gotten so bad. Matt, can you still hear me on the Twitter Spaces? For the YouTube channel. All right. Well, can people on YouTube Live comment if you can hear Matt, even though you can't see him? Can you hear him on YouTube? Because then we'll just keep talking, even if you can't see him. Maybe his internet's so bad they just cut out the camera. I think yes. Matt needs Xfinity. No audio from Matt on YouTube right now. Matt, maybe you want to switch back to the other one. All right. We're just waiting 1 second. We'll just kick off our outline of things. Not now. No one can hear Matt right now. So we're waiting. Okay, Matt's coming back onto the YouTube. Here he is. I can't see you, but I hear you. That's fine. You have a camera box that showed up. It's all black. So there's no picture, but your box is there. Yeah. Still no audio on YouTube. Yeah. Have any jokes to buy the time, Tony's saying. I do have jokes. Why did the chicken cross the playground? To get to the other slide. That's what my kids told me recently. So it was a funny joke, buying some time while Matt gets his YouTube set up here. I think they're talking about. I don't think they can hear you, Carl and DRK say no audio still on YouTube. Yeah, yeah. All right. Okay, refresh his browser, Alec. That's what Alex says. Refresh your browser too. Okay. So while we're starting, I mean, the big thing today is the macro market. Powell had his. Oh, now Matt's back. Very good picture here. Let's see if we can hear him. Okay, I bet you people can hear him now. So the big thing today is the macro market with Powell's comments this morning to the Senate. And it looks like the market is interpreting it as hawkish somehow. Matt said he was listening to it. I was listening to snippets of it. There's a few comments where they just seem like they're putting 50 basis points. People have speculated about it, but it seems like he referenced it more directly as like an actual option that might even be probable. At least the market is interpreting it as probable. The Fed futures have priced it in as probable at this point, as more likely than a 20. Yesterday, a 25 basis point hike was more likely for their March meeting than a 50 basis point. But now, as of right now, according to Fed futures, a 50 basis point hike is more likely than a 25 basis point hike. So that's how the market's interpreting it, to raising rates faster. I think a lot's going to depend on next week's CPI print. And then they have the meeting like the week after that, I think. So that's where we are with the macro market and why I think a lot of the growth stocks took a big hit this morning. Does that jive with what your understanding is, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was listening to Powell's comments for a while this morning. It did seem like he was kind of continuing the message that he's been saying for a while, that inflation is proving kind of more resilient in a bad way than he was expecting. So it's going to take longer than most people are thinking, and their terminal rate is going to be higher than most people are thinking. So that kind of a reiteration of those comments is, I think, very bad news for people who are kind of hoping there'd be a quick pivot from the Fed policy.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that kind of blip of good news for December. Then the January CPI numbers were not so great. And so I think what Powell is saying is like there's more of a risk for pivoting on policy too soon than for kind of going too long and hurting the economy, because like he said before, they've got the tools to kind of fix that mess. If they really do like crash the economy, they can just stimulate again and get things going. But he's certainly more concerned with letting inflation linger too long. I think and so they're going to err to the side of higher and longer, which is not good news for equities or for the economy generally speaking, I think.
Yeah. Evan in the comments says, how much longer do you think Powell raises rates from the date Elon stated he should start cutting? Yeah. So, I mean, there's this guy on Twitter I follow. I think I have retweeted him once in the past. I can retweet him again if people in the comments are like, want to know, but his name is Eric Wallerstein. I think he's a reporter for Wall Street Journal, but it's like his focus is just to tweet stuff about the macro market economy and interest rates and like what's going on with the Fed. And he's very concise. He doesn't cluster your feed with other junk. Too many people I follow end up retweeting other people and he's a good, efficient follow for this stuff. And, a tweet he put out this morning was that, the current pricing based on the Fed futures is that there's going to be a 5.6% terminal rate peak in October. That's what's priced into the Fed futures now. Whereas in early February, the terminal rate was 4.9%, and it was expected to peak in July. So there's a big movement, right? And I think that goes a lot to I think it's all really because of that jobs report and the CPI, the hotter than expected CPI report that we got for January that came in mid-February, those reports, right? So I feel like we're just kind of, the market digested that data and is like now like, oh, wow, it's going to have to go up higher and it's going to be longer before it peaks, so that seems to be kind of what's reinforced by Powell's comments this morning as well. So we'll see. I mean, hopefully the next CPI number that comes out next week, is going to be better than expected in terms of cooling things off, because the macro market is highly determining where not just Tesla, but all the growth tech stocks are going. if the peak was still 4.9, if it hadn't changed, if the CPI, if that data hasn't changed, I wouldn't be surprised if Tesla was at 250 right now. It's just so
Yeah.
sensitive to these macro interest rates. So if you're trying to short-term time or trade Tesla in any way, you really have to pay attention to the macro stock market and interest rates and what the Fed's doing, because that's, all the growth tech stocks are super sensitive to it right now.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, the just from a kind of pure finance theory standpoint, when you're discounting at a much higher risk-free rate and a good chunk of your earnings are in the out years and your beta is like 2 or higher like it is for Tesla, like all those things really translate directly to a higher cost of equity and therefore lower net present value when you calculate all those cash flows and lower stock price. So it's kind of frustrating because I'd much rather like spend this past 12 minutes talking about Tesla Investor Day, but it is
Which
just
we're
like
going to get to.
you can't fight the Fed, and it's so important to
You can't
at
ignore
least
the
stay on
Fed
top of
or
this.
fight it. Yeah, you
Yeah,
can't ignore it or fight it. Exactly. Yeah. If you ignore the Fed and you're trying to trade for any short-term intervals, you're really losing out. You got to keep that. You got to know that data point, what's going on there. So, moving on to Tesla Investor Day, that was a big day. I mean, I think it was their first ever investor day, to be honest. I think it was their first official like investor day. They've had like AI day, they've had, battery day, they've had, they have their annual shareholder
there's
meeting,
shareholder meetings.
but
Yeah.
this was the first investor day they ever had. And I mean, there was good. In our prep call yesterday, we talked a little bit about it. There's good and bad and confusing. There's 3 parts, sort of. I mean, why don't you kick off the good, Matt? Let's start with the good news and the bad news, I guess, or not, not so good news, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most obvious one that everyone was expecting was the Giga Mexico plant. So they finally announced that, and I thought the way they did it was actually kind of funny. It was like after a break, and then it was like announcing Giga Mexico, and it was just like on this like slide in the
Yeah.
side. And I
Yeah.
was like, wait, is anyone going to like comment on the fact that they just announced this factory? And then finally they did. I don't know, 30 seconds later.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of funny. And the weird thing about that was, they were really mum with the details on like, timing or, like when the first vehicles would be produced. And then the next day, Tom Zhu goes out and he's like, yeah, we're going to start right away. We're going to have like vehicles in 2024. We're going to try to beat the 9-month, construction
Yeah.
time that Giga Shanghai had. And I was like, why is Tom saying this, on his own the next day rather than in the investor day? So that was
Yeah.
kind of funny. I felt like the market reaction would have been a lot better if they just shared those details on actual investor day. So
Mhm.
it was kind of funny, I thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of the other thing, I mean, the most overarching theme was just the deep culture they have of cost cutting. That was so prominently on display, and as like a long-term shareholder, that was by far the most important thing. They're
Yeah.
trying to grow to 20 million units and a terawatt hour of energy. They really reiterated that goal. But you can't do that unless you move significantly down market, and the only way you can move significantly down market is if you can lower your costs.
Mhm.
And so they laid out, I think, an incredibly compelling vision of how they can do that by cutting costs, not only of the vehicle, but even of like their O&M, and how can we get better with doing, deliver a better product or service while cutting costs at the same time. And it's like, that's been one of Tesla's miracles, I think, if you look at their O&M growth compared to their revenue growth, it's like shocking how many times they've been able to cut O&M while growing revenue. And then, of course, it doesn't like cut. You can't cut forever. It's got to grow eventually. But the efficiencies that they are finding are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that, and the bot was super impressive to see. They kind of blasted over that, but I thought the amount of progress that they achieved on the bot in just a few months was super impressive. So I mean, overall, like as a long-term shareholder, I think ARK Invest had an email the other day that it said it was all substance and no flash, and I think that's
Yeah.
very much true. Like,
Yeah.
they were not at all trying to like pump the stock price. It was like a very clear, here's our like strategy in the very long term, and that was, I think it was an incredible vision that they painted.
Yeah. Credible vision, long-term conviction stays very high for long-term investors. And personally, as a long-term investor, my personal account, I'm very happy with Investor Day. I'm okay. I don't need the stock price to pop or whatever. Our fund that we manage is much more short-term minded. People aren't paying us just to hold Tesla stock for them, right? They can do their own. We're trying to get better returns and try to do things and time things. And it's a little frustrating if you're trying to short term or medium term do anything to get a better return than just holding the stock long term, right? So it didn't have any short term punches to really punch the price up of Tesla stock or boost the hype, or not hype, but just like there was no unveiling of a product. A lot of people thought they were going to talk about the Gen 3 platform was referenced on that invite, and we thought they'd talk more about it. They didn't really. They kind of skirted around it and just said, yeah, in the future, we're going to have a Gen 3 platform. We're not going to show it yet, but we will in the future. But these are the things we're preparing to do to improve everything in our factory manufacturing process. It was kind of cheap, like a cheap punch. I felt like, I don't know, cheap punch is the wrong word, but it felt like, I don't know, it felt like a trick, like to hype things up, hype the Investor Day up for people that were hoping for some more. And then they just pulled the carrot away and like, nope, we're not showing you the carrot yet. Yep, we referenced we were going to in the invite, but in reality, and then there's the whole hype of the Investor Day actual invite having that special graphics and stuff. Like what was that about? That I don't know. Did we ever find make sense of that, Matt? Any of the theories or any of the things people found in that special visualization of the Investor Day invite, did it make sense to anything? Do you think?
Nope, not that I've seen. But
that was just noise then,
like,
right?
well, I mean, the most basic interpretation of that graphic was that it was all about like a very high quantity of cars, right?
Yeah.
And that it was, but like then like why did they make it 3D? It's just
Yeah.
like
Might have do
they
some
didn't really
weird
talk
things to the
about
invite.
anything 3D at all. So that was
Mhm.
a little strange.
Yeah, and they referenced
Martin,
Boring Company and SpaceX, and that wasn't touched on at all in the presentation, right? So it did
yeah.
feel like a bait and click, right? That's what I see Carl Brangle. That's the right term, a bait and click. Yeah. Instead of a bait and switch, it was a bait and click, invite. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, Melody says I completely disagree with you. I mean, as a long-term investor, I'm very happy with what they said. Don't get me wrong. But as someone wanting to see something a little more flashy based on the anticipation going into it, like a short-term investor, if you're going to be a short-term investor, it was disappointing for sure. I mean, so there's two different mindsets there, right? So a lot of the Tesla community is made up of a mix of those two people, or some people are just the long-term conviction, foundation, first principles only investors that'll hold it for 10 plus years. And then certain people are only short-term minded, holding Tesla on margin, buying options. And then there's a big mix of, a little bit of both, and so I think if you're any part of the shorter term minded focus, you're disappointed to some degree, but depending how long-term minded you are, you're pleased overall anyway, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I see in the comments Henry saying that Elon doesn't care about short-term investors. That is 100% true. So,
Yes.
like, that's I think why we urge caution around playing with options at all. We don't comment a lot about any trades that we make in the fund because it's so volatile and it's very hard to kind of get the timing right.
Yeah.
I think the reason we even play in this space in general, and it's like very easy to kind of criticize the strategy in a year like we've had in the past year where things aren't where the stock's going down, is that like, oh, you're just like short-term trading trying to like get ahead of things. But I would argue we're actually looking at the fundamentals and saying like the market is just wrong on earnings, and so there's outsized gains to be had if you can as long as you're not going crazy on like deep out of the money options or anything like that. Just assuming that Tesla continues to grow like they are.
Yeah.
So the kind of taking our option strategy out of it, the thing that I found disappointment or disappointing was the kind of demand concern. And I talked about this a
Yeah.
little bit on Farzad's stream yesterday. I think it's like a legitimate question of like, hey, what's going on? Because the numbers out of China seem low. It seems like inventories are piling up. We just had another round of price cuts yesterday. But last week they were just saying, oh, there's no demand problem. We've got, Tom Zhu said something to the effect of, we have more orders than the Shanghai plant can deliver in China. And it's like, if that's true, why are we not seeing that in like the delivery data or in the inventory data? So
Yeah.
either it seems like there's going to be some huge wave of deliveries in the next couple of weeks, or it seems like there is at least some sort of short-term demand issue. In that case, like why wouldn't Tesla just be a little bit more upfront about that? That's the part that's a little frustrating to me, is they're like, trust us, demand's not a problem. I'm sick of talking about it. But
Yeah.
then like a week later they're cutting prices. There's just like a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing, it seems to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, can't they could show us some metrics if that's true, right? But they kind of don't want to show us the updated metrics of order backlog or something. I mean, Troy calculates it and estimates it, and yeah, it looks like there's a demand issue in some places, some regions, especially like Europe's fallen off. So, China, the deliveries have come down. Demand is infinite. I think that was a comment Elon said, and
Yeah.
that's like speaking hyperbole. I give him the benefit of the doubt; he's just speaking hyperbole. But I think he means like demand is incredible, and yeah, that I think maybe he means like demand is going to exponentially go up the lower we get the price. Of course, that's the case with anything with the laws of supply and demand. But are you going to keep cutting the price to eat into margins infinitely? No, at some point you have to stop cutting the price so that you still have some type of margins to reinvest into the business. And it's
Hmm.
just disappointing to both, I think, you and I, that they haven't experimented more with the advertising to reach audiences outside the Tesla Twitter sphere. All the tweets that go out, all that, like all of us on this channel, all of us watching this, we're all aware of that stuff, everything that Tesla's doing. But the people outside of our bubble, which is, the vast majority of the population in the US, they have no freaking clue what's going on with Tesla. They just are told what they see in headlines of, autopilot crash feared or whatever, like safety concerns. They don't even know Teslas are the safest car on the road. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Can't we just educate the national population in the US that Teslas are by far the safest car in the road? Can you at least do that for us, Elon? I mean, that would be a huge win for everyone. Everyone. I mean, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
Is it out of principle just to prove a point? Like, listen, I don't need to do traditional advertising. Look at us. We're going to make a historical case study of a business for people to study for years to come. I feel like that's where he's going, as opposed to just like, let's just do the right thing for the overall good of everyone to understand that the safety of the Tesla cars, educate the whole population that they're safer than everything else. I don't know. I'm getting
Yeah.
riled up thinking about it, but it just bothers me, irks me.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to just pile on Elon and the team, because most of what I saw I really loved, but like I don't understand for the life of me why you don't just try spending $50 million in a variety of advertising channels, kind of see what works and what doesn't, and if the whole thing is a flop and it's like not a priority, great. Let's at least we've got that data point. But like Elon was saying, they cut prices, and so they gained some understanding of kind of demand elasticity to price, and that was like good data to have. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you try to get similar data points for marketing? Because
Yeah.
to your point, Emmett, there's still so much misinformation on like Tesla fire safety, or like these autopilot crashes,
Yeah.
or like range anxiety is still a thing, which is hilarious to me, because like people who own a Tesla
Yeah.
generally don't have any range anxiety for any situation ever.
I mean, the
So
bottom line is human safety should be number one and paramount. And I think Elon believes that when he thinks about it that way. And it is. It is number one and paramount. Like, Teslas are the safest statistically, and why not get the word out there so that like mom and pop who are outside of our bubble, when they're thinking about the next car to buy for their kid, like who's aggressive driving like a BMW, or they're like, oh, let's get them a used Model 3 instead, like it's, and save their kid's life when their kid's driving drunk on the road, driving off a cliff or whatever, like it's going to save some amount of marginal lives if they just got the word out that Teslas are the safest. Like, I don't understand how Elon, he's the decision maker on here. I bet there's people in the Tesla team that would love to do this, but I think Elon is the final decision maker here, and we trust him for almost everything. He's not perfect. I trust him for almost everything, but this particular item, I think he's wrong, and I wish he would reconsider. I mean, just testing it out, the advertising, like you're saying, Matt, makes sense.
yeah, I mean, a lot of what they were focused on, I mean, they said it right from the outset, like, let's not talk about anything in the next 2 quarters. And so I think their whole mindset, at least for that presentation, was in the long term, we have unlimited demand because we're going to be like by far the most cost competitive. And if you're looking at the details, it's like, yeah, like if you're going to lower your cost by, 50%, so your cost of goods sold is going to be, I don't know, let's just be conservative and say $18,000 or something like that. Like nobody can really compete with that. So I think their upside potential in the long term of getting to 20 million units is very reasonable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the
I
same
see Harry
time, like,
Chu in the comments saying, sorry, if Tesla were to spend billions on advertising like Ford and GM, then they couldn't do a low cost car. That is true, but we're not saying like they could spend 50 or 100 million and get a huge bang for the buck to test it out potentially. And then they wouldn't have to cut costs, price it, So anyway, go on, Matt. What you're saying.
Our point is that price cuts do cost billions of dollars anyways. Like
Many
if you're
more,
cutting your
yeah.
average cost $10,000 and you're selling 1 million units, then that's $10 billion of like lost margin or cost, however you want to look at it. So it's not like price cuts are free. They're not. It's just what I would like to do is like try some different combination of price cuts and marketing spend and like find what's the right happy medium. And if advertising is a total bust, then absolutely like don't do that anymore.
It's not going to be a total bust.
I think why not just try it?
Yeah.
No, I agree, but
yeah.
I
think they're afraid that it's not going to be. Maybe he's afraid it's not going to be a total bust, and he's going to be pressured to even put more on advertising because it was such a huge success. Like $100 million of advertising generated like 1 million new orders in the U.S. at full price with like maximum margins. And so once they have that, then it's like a no-brainer. They should continue it, and he doesn't want to go down that road. But that still doesn't make sense to me if you're saving lives by getting more people into Teslas than otherwise would be, outside of the Tesla bubble, especially, so. It's just it's frustrating. I don't know.
Yeah. So the other thing, in the long term, I loved their plan, but the one question I had on the longer term, we've spoken a decent amount about the short term, but Elon said they only need about 10 models to get to 20 million units. There was I think even in that slide they showed there were only two more cars that they planned on including. There's the Roadster too, but that'll be really small unit volume. But like I think it's a legitimate question whether 10 different units or models can get to 20 million in sales, especially since some of those will be like S and X, which are not going to be like those like combined won't be more than 200,000 units, I don't think, in the long term. Yeah. So you're really talking about seven. Like probably half of the 20 million is going to have to be like 2 or 3 models, and like that hasn't really happened historically. I think it certainly is possible, but it's at least a risk that I think is worth exploring in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a risk. I'm not as worried about that as you are, Matt, to be honest. Like I know Drew Dixon is also he's more worried than you are even about the number of models.
Yeah.
I think if they have a really good Model Y and a really good Model 3 and they have a couple variants of it, like, maybe a hatchback Model 3 and eventually or something, and they have, 2 different ranges and trims for the Model Y and 3. I think if they're really good, they can sell many more millions than anyone would imagine of those cars, even let alone the Gen 3 platform. So they'd have to lower prices, obviously, which they'll continue to do. And I was really excited, like we said, about all these cost cutting measures they're doing with the manufacturing process, and that was all great stuff. I'm glad they educated us on, like Tesla Education Day is what I thought of it as. They really educated us on how they're doing it, which is stuff you and I had faith that they're doing all this time anyway. And so a lot of people outside a lot of institutional investors who might have been drawn to the presentation, hopefully they were educated on, or hopefully open their eyes a little bit more about what is in the meat and potatoes of Tesla. But the one thing just with a grain of salt is, I remember Battery Day, and it was a similar, educational event with the Battery Day. In terms of how they're going to get the batteries ramped up and the cost of batteries lower. And there's things in there, you believe it all, but and same with the way back the first AI day or full self-driving day, we were supposed to have 1 million robo-taxis on the road by now or whatever, all this stuff. So you just got to take everything with a grain of salt, because some of this stuff will not come true, will not pan out, or it'll just take a much longer time period, whether it's the robotaxis taking much longer than anticipated, or with the battery day separating the lithium from the clay. That was a big point and like an
Yeah.
innovation like that seemed to, resolve so much, but it seems like that's not happening. So there might be something in this manufacturing process education day we saw that is not going to actually happen that we're all excited about. So just take it with a grain of salt. Much of it will happen or is already happening, but some of it just may not pan out. So, just that's all I'd like to say as well. Just take everything with a grain of salt that Tesla's saying. They all intend to do it. I'm sure they intend to do this stuff, but some of it likely won't pan out.
So I think the other comment or category, we had the good, the bad, and the confusing. One of the confusing things to me was like I felt certain they were going to talk about hardware 4, and then they didn't. They really hardly spoke about FSD at all, which we just had AI day, so maybe that's understandable. But it seems so strange to me that they didn't mention hardware 4 at all, and now we learn like a week later that they're rolling it out already. Like hardware 4 is being delivered to a lot of customers. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's confusing. I think it has to do with Tesla doesn't want to Osborne their current vehicles. Elon, and it's true, like they're always improving Teslas. There's no year models. They don't want to do things by year. Every 3 months or 6 months or some kind of improvement that consumers would care about and wait for. But if you kind of talked about it a lot, then it would make some consumers just indefinitely wait for the newest version. They would never buy a Tesla, and I think that's
Yeah.
a little bit of a concern, and they don't want people to act that way because there's always going to be a newer Tesla right around the corner that's with a new hardware version or a new battery structure that goes for more range, or a new infotainment computer that lets you do, Steam versus not being able to do Steam games, so there's just new stuff all the time. And so sometimes these new little things that we're excited about, I feel like they purposely don't talk about, even though they could, because they don't want to get too many news headlines about it to Osborne the current rate of sales for people that are going to wait for whatever that new thing is. That's my thought.
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right. I mean, there's no other reason not to do it. I mean, they have the chip, they have all the new cameras. It's not like, there was any information they needed to wait for. So,
Yeah.
and I think that was something similar, like, with the Gen 3 platform, there's a very good chance that could Osborne some of their current sales. So I think it's probably the smart thing to do, not to give too many details away. So I'm actually, even as a short-term investor, I'm okay with how restrictive they were on the details around Gen 3.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the hardware 4, I guess we'll find out when they get FSD 11 gets, let out to everyone in April, that, if hardware 4 makes a difference at all or not yet. Maybe that's just going to impact future versions as well. But yeah, FSD, there was no real updates about FSD on the investor day. They did show some safety statistics though, right? Didn't they show some new safety statistics for FSD, or just Tesla cars driven with FSD, and how it's like, it was like, I forget the actual
Yeah, it
numbers, but
was
it was
like
like 6 or 7
3
times safer.
million. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So why don't they, and that, that's perfect data to put into like a national advertising campaign. I just don't understand. It's just like they're letting misinformation, get the better of a lot of the population who has, that's what they look at instead of the Tesla's source data on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when
So
like Elon's kind of dunking on Dan O'Dowd and that sort of thing, it almost makes Dan O'Dowd seem like a peer, or like that his point is valid and so is Elon's. But if you just put the stats out there, you can say, hey, listen,
yeah.
like we're just testing this out and it's already 7 times safer. Like I
Yeah.
could picture in my mind some amazing campaign about like a family driving and they get in an accident, and like, or they're about to get in an accident and the autopilot thing stops it, and like that would be a really eye-opening thing to a lot of people who aren't in this Tesla bubble. Or like another campaign about you are in an accident, but because of the crumple zone being so much larger,
Yeah.
everybody can just walk away. And it's like you could do a series of like 5 safety advertisements that
Yeah.
like would really
Yeah.
like open people's minds and be like, wow, I
Yeah.
had no idea Teslas were so safe.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It'd be great. I mean, maybe one day we can organize a fan organized commercial for, I don't know how much money it would cost, but we can get donations. Someone could organize something, and I would donate $1,000 to that. I'm sure a lot of people would donate 10 or $100. And if you get enough of us Tesla, Twitterverse people who are in agreement put it could be $1 million pretty quick, and then a couple $1 million, and then you get a commercial segment. And as long as you get Tesla's approval, you could just run it that way. And I bet it could drum up orders we could improve the, $1 million invested in some commercial like that could ultimately lead to a valuation of many billions higher for Tesla stock, pretty quickly if everyone becomes more aware of the safety aspect of Tesla. It would be interesting.
Yeah, and then you had to have so much more of a backlog that you could, optimize your deliveries a little bit easier. You wouldn't have to, try to match demand with supply.
You wouldn't have to lower prices again anytime soon.
You wouldn't have to lower prices. So yeah, I mean, which like the delivering value to customers, I've seen a lot of people who criticize the marketing as being like, oh, well, like you're just taking savings away from customers and putting that in Tesla's pocket. But my point is like, which they can then use to fund their $125 billion CapEx plan.
Yeah.
Which is like, the Tesla needs a lot of cash flow. So
Yeah.
like they can't be running at tight margins in order to fund the growth profile that they're after. So I really think it's important for Tesla to have very significant margins going forward in order to self-fund this ambitious plan that they have.
Yeah.
So
and one other thing that you and I touched on yesterday, a theory, and this could be playing into Elon's mind. And I'm not sure whether I agree with it. I mean, if you look, I could see the argument to be made, and I could understand where the arguments to be made on this. Maybe Elon does not want Tesla stock price to go up anytime soon. Like maybe he wants to keep progress going. He doesn't want Tesla stock price to go down, obviously, and make all the employees and investors upset or whatever, but maybe that now that he's sold all the stock he needs to as well for the time being, just maybe long term, he would prefer the Tesla stock to, stay between $200 and $300 a share, let's say, for like the next few years, even, because last time when the Tesla stock price went up, 5x in a year or two, he saw enormous amounts of talent retiring from Tesla, Tesla engineers, like, top talent probably retiring, leaving to do other things because they made X million on their stock incentive plans. And in that exodus, maybe it set Tesla back further than it didn't let it advance as fast as otherwise it could have, so maybe he wants to keep, that from happening. And so that's one possibility we were thinking about. I don't know, people in the comments, what they think. I mean, Elon, I think, is that governing all his other decisions about what information he's releasing about on Investor Day and whether or not he wants to keep, lower prices? Do you think his desire to keep the Tesla stock price, to keep Tesla engineers with Tesla longer, do you think that desire is governing his actions on all the other stuff? I guess that's the theory.
yeah. And I think there's certainly some validity to that. I mean, if Tesla goes up, 10x this year, you're definitely gonna have some people retire and move out. So,
Yeah.
like, he clearly laid out the plan for Tesla being the most valuable company in the world. So it's not like he doesn't have the same long-term belief that we do. He very much does. But you don't want that to happen all at once, kind of like we saw in 2020 and 2021. Because that alone can disrupt your business, and it makes your stock-based comp more expensive and all that. So I think there's some validity. Like I think a steady rise is going to be a lot more helpful for the company operationally than 10 years of stagnation and then like the parabolic increase at the end of that decade. So I think it's certainly a legitimate theory.
Yeah. The only problem there is, if you try to keep Tesla depressed from rising too quickly too soon than it naturally would have if you just kind of kept the same pace of information coming out or whatnot, is that at some point the stock price will catch up to that kind of fundamental progress that's happening behind the scenes when it comes to fruition. And so at some point in the future, maybe in 3 or 4 years, if he kept it range bound 200, 300 again, then at some point it might just pop to 1,000, in 1 year again, triple in 1 year again suddenly. And that's going to be that's going to lead to another mass exodus in that year of employees who are like, oh, I've made my 10 million in retirement Tesla stock options. I'm going to leave. I don't want to work this hard anymore, So There
Yeah.
will be another, but maybe he wants full self-driving solved before then. There's probably a lot of FSD engineers that, he needs to hold on to, especially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all
So,
right.
so Emmett,
Yeah.
I'm curious. I think if I were to replay the last 45 minutes or so, we probably come off as very bearish on the event and the stock. So
Yeah.
objectively, we like to do things on like a numbers basis.
Yeah.
But if you were to rate the event and kind of like let's just say the event scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, how would you rate the event?
As a long-term investor, a 7.5, I would say, maybe an 8. I don't know. As a less long-term, if I had just been a long-term investor and ignored all the noise of the invitation and the reveal and all that, I would say it was like an 8, right? But
Hmm.
as a given our short-term minded focus on the fund and all the hype with the invite and Elon talking about SpaceX and Boeing Company being involved, and the next gen platform information will be revealed, in the invite language, even with all that hype kind of going into it. When you put that all in the equation, I would give it like a 4, 3.5, or a 4, just because I was like, oh, there's a lot of cool stuff here for long term still, but all the short term stuff, nothing panned out for what I wanted.
Yeah.
What about you? What would you have rated it
I'd
as?
so I'd probably
And I
give
and
it
then
like
one thing, one caveat. The only reason in the long term I give it an 8 instead of a 10 is because I was there for Battery Day. I was there for the first AI Day. I know some of these things do not come to fruition. I know that. So, they mentioned all these incredible plans, and it would be a 10 if I knew all of the stuff was already in place and coming to fruition right now. But these are their intended plans. I know like some of it is not going to happen. So that's why I give it an 8 instead of a 10, as a long-term investor. Anyway, go on.
yeah. So I'd probably give it a 7. I think I was honestly mostly happy with it.
Hmm.
The things I didn't like, Elon's comments about lithium, I actually still really disagree with. And I'm like more than willing to admit that Elon's smarter than me and he can know this stuff. But I'm
Yeah.
listening to a lot of people within the lithium industry that are saying in the next couple of years we're fine, but in like 2026 and to 2030 there's not enough mining capacity coming online in order to feed the top of the funnel. So Elon's
Mm.
talking all about lithium processing, and I think in the short term that is the constraint, but in the medium term I think it's definitely mining. And given the lead time of like 7 years to get a new mine approved, I think this is a legitimate risk to the long-term strategy. So I hope Elon's right about that, but I'm not convinced that he is. And he didn't expand on it. He's just like, well, mining is not the constraint, it's processing. And it's like he didn't give us any proof of why that's the case. So that I found that a little bit disappointing. I found the capital allocation strategy, which was one of the things that there was on the invite. It was basically just, hey, we invest in building out capacity and eventually we'll do dividends and buybacks. And it was like 2 minutes. And I was like, there
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot of substance there, to be honest with
Yeah.
you.
That was
So I
also
found that a little
lacking.
disappointing.
Yeah.
And then the just total lack of demand, like data points about demand, and kind of the dismissive attitude toward that I found disappointing. So those were the three, what I would say are kind of like meaty, substantive things that even as like a super bullish long-term investor, like even in the long term, those things are slightly concerning to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with all that. Yeah.
But still incredibly bullish.
Yeah. You got to I mean, it's easy to, basically my default is very bullish on Tesla. And so I'm looking for the little pieces I can be negative on with it almost, that's the way to think of it. Like, I think Matt and I are both in the same camp there, where overall that's our most exciting stock of this generation still.
Yep.
But it's so widely accepted in our minds that way. That's our default, that we're so used to that we're allowing, like, training ourselves to look at any little negative pieces we can find to pick at, and so, we apologize if it comes off as bearish, but nothing's perfect. We're just trying to find the imperfections, I guess. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, should we? What you want to touch on? Rocket Lab had their earnings, and then do Q&A.
Yeah. Maybe so. I'll just share my thoughts pretty quickly going through here. So this was another one that surprised me a little on the downside. Gross margins, which previously had been so healthy, and that was, I think, one of the reasons we were so bullish on the stock in the medium term, really contracted pretty significantly, and so that was definitely a problem. And they spoke to it on the earnings call that essentially, they priced a lot of these launches. And their space systems, other components, like a year and a half ago, and so you've got old prices in a like very rapidly rising inflationary environment, and so that created a lot of gross margin pressure. But gross margins are going the wrong way. You'd think as they kind of scale up, they'd see some operational efficiencies, but we're not seeing that, at least yet. So that was a cause for concern for me. And then the other one is that the backlog decreased again this quarter. So I think it's either 2 or 3 quarters in a row that backlog has actually decreased. So that's a little bit concerning, because a year, 18 months ago, they had these crazy stats where like
Yeah, I
backlog
remember.
would grow like 30% within the quarter, and then they have this other piece of information that says from the end of the quarter to when we're releasing our earnings, we actually increased another $60 million our backlog. So they had this like rapidly growing backlog, and now that seems to be holding steady and even dwindling a little bit. Now it's still $500 million. It's still like a very healthy overall level, so I'm not really that concerned with it. But that was a little just another data point that wasn't trending the right way. But the thing that really surprised me is that they're targeting the Neutron to be launched, the first launch to be in Q1 of next year, which is like way faster than I thought they'd actually be. So if they can actually continue to make progress on that, like that's way more important than what their gross margins or their backlog is this year. So getting Neutron up and running, if they can actually start doing commercial launches next year, that would be a huge milestone.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think another concern is maybe the space industry has gone into a little bit of a lull, hence the United Launch Alliance, the rumor of it being up for sale. That's one of their main competitors who does things very cost expensively instead of cost effectively. So, I
Cost
think,
expensively, yeah.
yeah. So I think the whole space industry has probably come down a little bit. And maybe there's a bunch of innovative companies that were maybe startups or using research and development money that they no longer have, and startups that no longer have access to funding that were previously part of the launch cadence, that are no longer part of the order backlog. And so it's just it's a longer term stock, Rocket Lab. It's not something we buy like short dated call options on or anything, because
No.
it's a long term, almost like a venture capital investment. That's the way I think of it in my head. It's like, it's publicly traded, but if I was able to invest in Rocket Lab privately, back when we bought it publicly, personally, I probably would have, just like at that valuation, and I would just hold on to it for
Yeah.
years. So that's what we're doing for our fund, is we bought a piece and we're just holding on to it, and as long as we can, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I still believe that the whole like space industry is wildly misunderstood. I mean, you still got like Virgin Galactic and Virgin Orbit. In my mind, those
Mhm.
business models are just so completely inherently flawed. They've got no chance of making it, but they're still trading. Close to. They're not quite at the level of Rocket Lab, but in the same in spitting distance of Rocket Lab. And to me, it's like so like the market is not doing a good job of imagining what the space industry is going to look like 5 to 10 years from now. And so I think
Yeah.
eventually that's going to get sorted out, and there will be a revaluation of companies like Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab's probably the first among its peers. It definitely is.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a revaluation where you say, oh, actually, all the money that's in the Virgin Orbits of the world like should get reallocated to companies who are actually going to succeed in the long term. So I think, I don't know when that's going to happen. We're not trying to time that, but I think eventually there will be a kind of revaluation, and I look forward to that day.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. All right. Should we go to Q&A? Let's try to go for 15 or 20 minutes on Q&A, I guess. Alec, you want to post some questions from Bob Adams 1414 on Twitter. Tesla has indicated that they are managing the operating margin. What do you think is a realistic expectation for operating margin over the next couple of years after Austin and Berlin have fully ramped? Hmm. Matt, what do you think in your model? What are you modeling, or what are your thoughts on the operating margin over the next few years with the ramp?
So
Yeah, but they're
I'm
also cutting
terrible with
prices. They're also cutting prices.
I'm terrible with recall on stuff like this, so I can't remember offhand what I've got as operating
Okay.
margin in the model. So, maybe I'll just rather than talk about specific numbers, I'll just say, I'm looking at the numbers for operating margin, and I believe I've got it trending down at least for this year relative to where it was last year, and that's
Yeah.
really just a function of the gross margin getting
The
pinched.
price cuts.
Um, the price cuts, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but if you're going from what was it, 1.3 million last year, I believe 1.3 million deliveries to 1.8. You're gonna, even at a lower gross margin, as long as your operating expenses don't increase too much, you should still see some pretty significant free cash flow growth, and your net income. I remember the way that I'm projecting it, it's like a slight increase in 2023 compared to 2022. So essentially, you've got like almost the same financial metrics resulting from call it 500,000 higher deliveries this year. But then I think that's going to really accelerate next year when you're going to be at significantly higher scale. Crossing say 2 million units, and you're going to cut some cost of goods sold out of your gross margin, and so that's going to help to really transform things. So I think the way that I'm thinking about it is like this year is going to be like you've got this crazy earnings growth profile that's been like parabolic. I think we flatten out this year, but then kind of like regain that trajectory next year is the way that I'm thinking about it.
Yep. Next question is from at FOMO Rising on Twitter. Interesting name. Investor Day gave us a peek at Tesla's strategy with lithium. Elon specifically called out
Spodumene.
spodumene rock as their most likely lithium feedstock. Where specifically do you think that rock will come from? I mean, that's something we probably would need to talk to Josh's Blonde and the other guy again on. Josh's Blonde is probably has more knowledge on this. Have you looked at this at all, Matt?
Yeah, actually, I listened to a great podcast over the weekend with Joe Lowry, who does that lithium
Yeah,
podcast,
him
and
too. He would probably have a good
uh,
idea.
Jigger Shaw was actually on there, who's like Jigger Shaw is one of the most amazing voices on energy out there.
Oh wow.
He
Okay.
started Sun Edison, and then was doing like a venture capital fund um, for a while, and then he got tapped to run the Department of Energy's loan office, and so like he's actively involved in like funding new projects like this. And so they were both saying to get to like 1 terawatt hours of domestic battery production, there's not at all the capacity. I think Joe was saying domestically within the U.S., there's only around 250 gigawatt hours of like raw material inputs that we have like on like the roadmap by 2030. Jigger Shaw said he was at about 500, so like half of 1 terawatt hour. Which is only Tesla's like energy portion. It completely excludes automotive, and it completely excludes every other use of batteries in other industries and for their OEMs. So there's very clearly a not enough resource domestically in the United States, and it's not going to be there by 2030. But what Jigger was saying in particular was like Tesla's putting this this factory. Is it in Corpus Christi? It's somewhere on the coast, I think. But what they were saying is like he wants like and it's actually U.S. government policy that they want the raw ores to come in from South America and from everywhere else, and the U.S. to really be focused on doing the processing part of it, because that's what they think is going to be the most value added part of it. But then you're kind of leaving up like, so where is that going to come from? And obviously in like lots of parts of South America, they're increasing production. There is a bit in the U.S. as well, but like these guys said, it's not nearly enough to get to Tesla's goals. So that's why I think this is a risk, because nobody has identified like where these extra 2 terawatt hours, let's say, that are needed are going to come from by 2030.
Yeah. Next question is from Scott2050 on Twitter. What are the odds that Rocket Lab will run out of cash by the time Neutron is operational? I mean, I think Matt's been paying closer attention to the financials than me. But from what I remember and what I've seen, based on the raise of the cash of SPAC, they have years of runway. And I think their estimate for Neutron is sometime next year to have the launch. So I think they have, maybe, if I recall, 3 years of runway or something like that if they didn't do anything special and they were losing money. I have no idea. I'm not sure if that's still the case, how close they are to cash flow neutral at this point, or how much cash they're losing quarter. But it's a lot less than something like Rivian, for example, who's got a issue debt already today. Apparently, there's some bonds they're issuing. So I think Rocket Lab has a lot of runway and can go for several years if they had to. What do you think, Matt? Have you looked at their?
Yeah, I don't recall the exact figures offhand, but they've got somewhere in the neighborhood of like 500 million in cash on hand. They commented on the earnings call that this is going to be like one of the peak years for their cash burn because they've got so much R&D expense going into Neutron. But I think if you look at their last couple of years of cash flow, like their operating cash flow burn is actually really low. And they're burning most of their cash in kind of investments in R&D, and they've actually been pretty acquisitive as well. But I think there's stock for a lot of those acquisitions if they continue. So they've got at least a year of runway, possibly more. But it's something that they need to manage for sure, because a year will go by fast.
So yeah, this year you think they would potentially use 300 to 500 million of cash this year, or something like that, in development and stuff?
So I'm looking at their cash burn right now. So like this isn't exactly right, but they burned a little more than $100 million in operating cash flow, and then like their
That was last year or last
last
quarter?
year, yeah,
Yeah, for the whole year.
last no
Yeah,
last
for the
year
whole
for the
year.
whole year.
Yeah,
But
that's what I
then
thought.
their investments, it looks like the business acquisitions are actually the biggest chunk of it. So in the last year, they spent like 132 million in cash for business purchases. So like they don't need to keep doing that.
No, I think they don't
Presumably
need
they
to.
would do stock with that if they were to do that going forward. But their PP&E purchases were more like 42 million, it looks like. So yeah, they've got probably 2 or 3 years, as long as they're not going out and spending a bunch of money on cash for acquisitions.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Evan Glansman on the YouTube comments. What is your ETA for the next gen vehicle reveal and start of deliveries? I still think this next gen vehicle might be more of like a robo taxi than like a $25,000 price car. I still think, I don't know. I still think the Model 3 could become the $25,000 price car, the same. So I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my head around the possibility that there's like an actual completely newly redesigned car with just stamped part. I think there was some illusion, like Tom Zeus said, paint is expensive when someone asked him about if they're going to use paint on the next gen car. And so I'm still trying to wrap my head around whether this next gen car is going to be a whole new model with like just stamped, plates, the exoskeleton, like the Cybertruck, for example. So it's less expensive. I'm still having a hard time believing that there's going to be some like $25,000, mini Cybertruck looking car that they'll just stamp out, millions of a year, out of Mexico first, and then other places. That's where the information seems to be going, but I just have a hard time believing that, still digesting that. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I'll take the other side of that argument. I mean, they clearly showed the next gen vehicle. There were two that were under the curtain on that one chart, and it was very distinct from the Model 3.
One is supposed to
And
be
then
a van. One is supposed to be a van, according to Dave Lee. According to Dave Lee's
Well,
speculation,
and
which I
it looks
believe
like
he
it. It's
talked to
got
some
like
executives. Yeah,
it's got like a flat side, like very
yeah.
high top. It looks like a van.
I think that's like a
So I think
robo
that's right.
taxi van vehicle. That's my thought. Anyway, go on.
But for the Gen 3 platform, they did say that there will be a robotaxi variant of the Gen 3 platform. So to me, it seemed pretty clear that, they're targeting just like a super cheap car, which you will be able to have a robotaxi variant. So, getting back to this question, so I guess I don't think that they're going to try to really make the Model 3 drastically cheaper.
Mm.
I'm sure they'll continue to like improve it, but I don't think it's going to be like some massive redesign that, where the Model 3 kind of takes the place. I think this will be more like a subcompact or maybe
Something.
even just a compact car that's a lot smaller, which I
Yeah.
think you need to get to like, Latin American and like African markets and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But in terms of when do I think it'll start? I mean, I think they're targeting, from what I could put together from Tom Zhu's comments, that like the Giga Mexico plant will be like up and running by the end of next year. But just because things never go to plan, I would say first deliveries, let's say like first half of 2025, I would think.
But he also said that they plan to get this up and running faster than Shanghai and beat their record, which would mean like a year from now it would be producing cars.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
Okay.
like I'm sure it'll go faster than Berlin and Austin, but
Mhm.
I mean those were so ridiculously slow.
Yeah.
Berlin in particular,
Yeah.
and even like the ramp rate of them is just so slow right now. Like how quickly they're increasing their output,
Yeah.
it's just going a lot more slowly than Shanghai. So
Yeah.
yeah, Mexico I do think will go faster. There's going to be less red tape there, but I just like if we get deliveries at all next year, I'll count that as a win.
Yeah. I just don't know how they can get away with this next gen platform without really hurting demand for already waning demand of Model 3. The Model 3 seems to have the weakest demand, right? It's much weaker
Yep.
than the Model Y, and it's already been price reduced. People just don't really want it as much as they want the Model Y or at that price point. So I have a really hard time with how Tesla's going to go about uh, creating this Gen 3 platform of the $25,000 car without completely Osborne, really hurting demand of the Model 3 even more. Even if they lower the price another $5,000 of the Model 3, which I think they'd have to do, maybe produce it at zero margins. That's maybe what they're going to have to do with the Model 3 or something. I don't know. It just seems like a tough pill to
Yeah.
swallow to me. That's why I think the Model 3 is like the $25,000 car. That's why I'm still wrestling with that in my head. But there's clearly a new platform they're going to unveil with the like you said, with the obviously based on the presentation. But I also think the Model 3 might become like the lowest cost car they produce or something eventually. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just my own speculation.
They need to do something with the Model 3 because the margins, from what I can tell, are really, really low right now on
Yeah.
that. Probably mostly out of Fremont because it's your least efficient factory. And like they were struggling so hard just getting that up and running in the first place. And so if you have to like cut prices and then it's kind of in this it's definitely in this no man's land where the Model Y is a better car and it's also like roughly the same to produce.
Yeah.
So maybe the decision eventually
Just
is
cut the Model 3 out.
to just cut the Model 3, or maybe cut it out of Fremont and you can support, I don't know, 500,000 or a million per year exporting globally out of Shanghai. Maybe that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do think the Model 3 is at risk. And I think as investors, we need to be okay with that. Like
Yeah.
no product like endures forever and
Yeah.
has like continually increasing demand. So
Yeah.
there may come a point where it just doesn't make sense to sell those.
I
And
just
I
have
think
a
that's okay.
I'd be so sad. I just have a hard time accepting the Model 3 might have, become obsolete soon. So I just, that was like that was the car that got Tesla into the next, conversation to become like a mass manufacturer. That was such a big thing for so long, and for them not to revamp it and make it like the next best cool thing, it makes me sad. Just to kind of, they might have to just give up on it eventually or something. I don't know. That it's possible though. It's very possible. So
Yeah. I've driven a Model 3 a couple times recently just for rental cars when I've been traveling. And like, man, I love the Model Y so much more than the Model 3. So I kind of get, if they're only
yeah,
$5,000 apart, like I think people will choose the Model Y all day long. But
yeah, yeah. Yeah. All right, let's go to the last question. We've been going a long time. Last question will be on the YouTube comments from Martin Muldoon. How you doing, Martin? Long time uh, fan here and good guy. Apparently, Twitter is still suffering losses. Will Elon have to sell more Tesla stock? Why can't he sell SpaceX stock? Hmm. Well, I wonder where you're getting the information that is Twitter still suffering more losses than anticipated by Elon? I mean, I think Elon anticipated Twitter would still suffer losses for a while, or for some time to come, from taking over. I think he's just cutting those losses drastically. And so I think he's hoping, if I recall from his language, like next year they could try to break even and start becoming profitable or something like that. So it depends where this information is coming from and how it's being reported. But it doesn't surprise me that Twitter is still suffering losses. I just think it's probably a lot less than it was suffering like 6 months ago. And maybe in 6 more months, it'll suffer much less losses, if any losses, than it is now. That's my speculation. Would have to see the source of that report data, Martin, if you want to put it in the comments or something. So I don't think Elon's going to sell more stock. I think he's going to live up to his word, and maybe he'll get more investor. There's more time. It allows for more investor interest into Twitter and so forth too. So there's probably other options he can tap into for marginal funding if he needs to. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I agree with you. So I hadn't heard this report either. It does seem to me though that even if it's a lot worse than he was expecting, he sold so much stock already. He said none till 2025 at least, no stock sales. So my thinking is, if he did kind of get in a situation where he needed to sell some more, maybe he would sell in 2024. So maybe he pulls up his timeline a year. But I think to do so right now, I think that's unlikely. But I think the other question, why can't he sell SpaceX stock? That wouldn't surprise me if he does that. I mean, I think he experienced a lot of backlash when he did that at all those stock sales kind of unexpectedly last year. I don't think he cares too much about that backlash, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's so much demand for SpaceX, investment, that it might make sense to fund a little bit out of there.
Yeah. I see Boiled Down AH in the comments saying that Ars Technica came out with an article yesterday talking about Twitter's decreased revenue, but they didn't talk about Twitter's lower expenses. So I guess that's the deduction made, is that, but I don't trust a lot of these publications. There's so many biased against Elon publications. All this stuff you really have to take with a grain of salt. And kind of find out where they're misleading us, because they're almost always misleading us in some way, shape, or form to get whatever bias they have across. So,
Yeah, in the lower revenue was really apparent before the deal closed.
yeah,
So just the one fact of revenue being significantly down, that doesn't necessarily change the cash burn projections that Elon had in hand when he sold. So I'm not convinced that there's any kind of new data there.
yeah, yeah, and they're laying off more staff, and he's also starting this Chat GTP competitor. It seems like within the Twitter umbrella somehow. So
Yeah, I got an Andre response. That was funny.
Oh yeah, you did. I saw something about that. Yeah, you said it could have been you, or a nice meme or something, and then did he respond to that meme though? I didn't follow the whole thread, but did he, or just respond to someone else responding to your meme, right?
So it was somebody said something to the effect of oh,
Andre
don't
Carpathy,
make
yeah.
Andre Carpathy, yeah. So something to the effect of don't make fun of Andre. He's still a good guy or whatever. And I just clarified, listen, it's mostly just a joke, but
Yeah.
I'm a little bit bummed that he joined OpenAI because I think he could be doing something more beneficial. And then Andre replied to that, and he said LOL meme. So he at least saw the meme and kind of understood that it was done, and it was a good joke.
Yeah.
But then he essentially said that he's not convinced that open source is the way to go for cutting edge AI. And he had a couple other kind of comments. He had a couple different takes and different replies on that thread. So it was I appreciated him even kind of giving an updated view on his thoughts. I mean, I kind of think the money's talking personally for him to kind of change his stance on open source,
and maybe the work-life balance a little bit, maybe, possibly.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't completely blame him for that,
No,
but
me neither.
you
I
know,
would do the same thing probably if I was in his shoes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'd be less transparent or more transparent. I don't know, but I would probably make the same decision career wise as he did. Yeah.
yeah. So you know, I don't exactly you know, I hold it against him that he did that. But
No.
like I said in one of my comments, like, you know, I just find it sad that he's there rather than working at a company like Tesla, which is like actually saving lives. So you know, he's got his own thing, but I do think it's going to be interesting to see what Elon tries to do with, you know, like creating another AI startup essentially inside of Twitter. That's going to be,
Yeah.
that seems like a big task. I'm not sure how that's
Yeah.
going to go.
It seems like the main existential risk is the AGI alignment issue, right? The alignment with human interests, and how do you control that alignment when they can't even align these chat bots very well? It's sort of like reminds me of like the butterfly effect, where like you know I was listening to this guy David Deutsch's Fabric of Reality, chapter analysis. He's this book called Fabric of Reality. He's done something called like he's a famous philosopher still living today, David Deutsch. Um, and basically, it's like you can't predict the weather. You can't predict. You have the data. The data is all there to potentially predict it, but it just becomes almost not. There's no almost infinity, right? There's either infinite or not, but it just becomes so drastically crazy with you know data possibilities that no one can predict the outcome. And so something similar, it seems like, with these large language models that and it's going to be similar with AGI, that like, yeah, you give it this huge data set, but no one can predict how it's going to bounce all the data within itself to figure out where it becomes aligned. It's just
Yeah.
unpredictable just by the nature of it. Almost, it seems like very strange.
It reminds me of what Microsoft did with that chatbot Tay a couple years ago. Do you remember that? Where
Yeah.
it
Oh
started off like,
yeah.
"Hey, I'm Tay. Like,
Yeah.
great to meet you," and then like 18 hours later, it's like Hitler was right. Like, it's like
Yeah.
all these crazy
Oh
things,
man.
and then they had to shut it down. It's like, wow, yeah. So if you're just training it on like human behavior, there's some
Yeah.
bad humans out there, and so like it's you've got a lot of a very high probability that there's going to be unexpected outcomes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really just roll the dice with this alignment stuff. It's kind of scary. So I was trying to get that guy Eliezer Yardowski or whatever, he did the Bankless podcast. I'm trying to reach out to him on Twitter
Oh
to get
yeah,
him on our channel, but he hasn't responded to me. I think a lot of people have been reaching out to him. So maybe one day we'll get him or someone and have a, you know, discussion on that. Just, because it's going to be a big part of not only, the world, but also Tesla. And so it's good to have a better understanding, I think, of where AI is going with this stuff. And
yeah.
people use the
It's
word AI so much. It's really, I feel like AI has been around, that term's been around. Really, what's different is neural networks and the application of neural networks to language and all this other stuff. Yeah, that's how I think of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think you're right. AI is just like it's almost lost its meaning, but you know,
Yeah,
there are some applications of it that I think are like going to really change the entire world and sooner than people think, and in ways that we can't imagine, even when
yeah,
we are paying attention to this space. So it's yeah, it's an area that I think deserves a lot more attention.
yeah. It's gonna be a wild few years. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys. Well, good chatting. Anything else you wanted to say, Matt? Anything else to touch on, or?
No, I think I've droned on enough, so I think we could
All
probably
right,
wrap it there, and we'll touch base next week.
next week. All right, guys.